Well, thanks for joining us, everybody. My name's Garrett Smith, and we're really excited to be here at AAEA. Today, we're going to be presenting the effect of RTI in a virtual environment. And in this, we're going to be covering the best practices for virtual screening and assessment, using norm reference percentile rankings to tier your students, individualized interventions and instruction to help support your current IEP goals, and progress monitoring at home and how that can be used to keep track of your students' progression. Now, throughout the presentation, we will be managing the chat. So if you have a question, please just go ahead and type it in there. And we'll do our best to, at the end, when we have a Q&A session, to address each one of those questions. And we'll provide follow-ups with the emails if you provided those in the chat as well. Really hope you enjoy it. This is one of our most popular ones. And I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you so much, Garrett. Yes, and again, use the chat feature. We can talk with you during it if you have questions, but also so we don't lose. If you had a question, we don't lose it. I have, if you just hopped in, I have muted everyone at the end of the presentation. I'll unmute. That way we can kind of open up a dialogue or discussion for, regarding any questions you may have. And also in the chat, if you just hopped on, please put your email. You can send it to one of us privately or just put it in the chat. That way we can send the recording after this session ends. And I think it's 11:33. I think we can go ahead and get started. All right, enjoy. Thank you all for joining.
Hello, thank you for joining us today. I'm Judy Teven, and with me is Melissa Sinanu to walk you through executing a successful RTI process in a virtual environment. Now, before we get started, I want to let you know that we will be recording today's session, and we will send it out to you along with a certificate for attending. And also, please throw any questions that you have into our chat. Our Classworks team is right there ready to field those questions, and then we'll also have a question and answer at the end of the webinar. So right now, your districts are having brainstorming sessions, surveying parents and teachers, thinking through the logistics of following CDC guidelines, and maybe pulling their hair out just a little bit. There is a lot to pull together to get this school year up and running. With everything you have to consider, there is one thing that we do know. Students are going to begin the school year with skill gaps, and we need to be ready to figure out what students need quickly to get them back on track. So RTI will address this, right?
RTI will definitely address this. With the number of students starting the school year behind expected to be larger than ever, you want a process that can tackle any group of students, be easy to administer and monitor, and will fit both an in-school and remote learning environment. Today, we're going to lay out a plan that meets all the criteria of a typical RTI process, but also goes beyond to meet the needs of a virtual environment. And if you're in the middle of starting an RTI process from scratch, don't worry. You can plan and execute it all virtually.
So today we want to answer some questions, such as how do I identify students for tiers using screening? Why is this data important now more than ever? How do I virtually progress monitor tiers 2 and 3? It's really tricky enough when we're all in school together. What are the best practices for meaningful intervention in a virtual learning environment? And data meetings are so important to RTI. How do we make them meaningful if we can't meet in person? How can we integrate social and emotional learning best practices into academic intervention? I know many students will need extra support this year. And speaking of best practices, having high quality tier 1 instruction is essential to executing powerful instruction that is flexible and works well in a virtual environment. And last but not least, we will look at an action plan that brings it all together. So let's just step back for a moment and think about what we're trying to accomplish. The purpose of RTI is to provide a structure and process to identify students performing below grade level, identify skills they need to work on as intervention, and monitor the student for growth and response to the intervention. Now, to accomplish this, we screen all students, identify who will be receiving intervention, think tiers 2 and 3, track the skills being mastered within that intervention, and use progress monitoring to measure the growth for each student.
And we appreciate that RTI can feel overwhelming in the best of times, but we promise it can be simplified even as we all work remotely if you develop a few key processes and limit the number of programs that you use.
So broadly speaking, 80% of students fall into Tier 1, 15% Tier 2, 5% Tier 3. Tier 2 students fall into that 25th percentile or below. Tier 3 students usually fall into the bottom 10 percentile. Since school this past spring was basically all virtual, it is safe to say that many students missed some key skills and will need to be catching up this fall. So your tiers may not be typical as your year starts. We have talked to so many school leaders who shared that they just don't know where student readiness will be on day one. Screening all students will identify the students who fell behind this past spring and the skills that they need to catch up.
Okay, so we're at day one and we need to screen all students. This fall, districts will have some students physically in class, some learning virtually, and maybe some splitting their time between the two. So you need a flexible assessment that students can take at home and know the results are reliable. So what are we looking for? First, valid and reliable. Check NCII to see if it's on the list. Second, make sure it doesn't necessarily require a proctor. Third, you want ease of login, right? Same login for students for both math and reading. You want to look for something that can be completed within about 30 minutes for students for each subject. You want data that includes overall nationally normed scaled scores, but you also want specific domain level data. Look for anytime administration. You don't want to have to wait for that testing window that might not open until September. And finally, look for something that will inform the intervention. So note that Classworks is listed by NCII as a virtual resource for screening and progress monitoring. And one question that came in ahead of the webinar is, where is a good place to find high quality resources for virtual screening and progress monitoring? Well, while we are partial to Classworks for screening and progress monitoring, K-8 reading and math, you will find other great resources alongside ours at NCII, the National Center for Intensive Intervention.
And the Classworks Screener is an easy to administer assessment that can be taken anywhere. This past spring and summer, really, thousands of students took the Classworks Screener at home. As part of our process this spring, we created resources to help parents feel comfortable with their students testing at home. So be sure that your parent resources explain the purpose of testing and the parent's role, which is to provide a quiet place to take the test and encourage them to do their best. So the assessment can serve its purpose, which is to track student performance levels and identify the skills the students need to succeed. Our districts had great results. Now, of course, students who are learning at school will take it there. Having the same screening tool for both on-site and virtual students helps you track growth of all students and ensures that both groups are moving forward equally.
And I really do want to emphasize, our districts had a great experience and got meaningful data without proctoring these tests. If you do have an instance where you think a student got help from someone else, that may be the time to have I really want to emphasize that our districts had a great experience and meaningful data was gathered without proctoring these tests. If you do have an instance where you think a student got help from someone else, that may be the time to have a conversation and either reassign the test or have the student take it while you're on a video call. But delaying gathering valuable student data for all your students while developing complex proctoring scenarios could delay critical student learning time.
That's a really great point, Melissa. Now, after all students have tested, your RTI team comes together, right? Reviews the data and determines who will be receiving intervention. An important step in this process is conducting these staff data meetings. So let's just talk about that for a moment. Your RTI process will include lots of meetings, right? It's everyone's favorite part. But to make sure these meetings are relevant and effective, it's important to have everything in place to execute a meaningful data meeting. This first meeting is to determine student tier placement, right? The school RTI team meets to establish these groups. So what is this data that you're going to be looking at? Use nationally normed data to see where your students stand in comparison to the larger group interacting with the same assessment. These apply regardless of where the test is administered and student learning is taking place. Percentiles are a perfect starting place for tier identification and also provide vital information about how much impact this last spring had on student learning and growth, the COVID slide that we've all been expecting. Let's look at the Universal Screener Results, RTI Recommendations Report. Now, you see this here, a list of students grouped according to their percentile rank. The information provided includes the student's percentile rank, the recommended progress monitoring level, along with the urgency of that intervention. These scores are an important piece of tier identification. Classworks follows the NCII guidelines and recommends using the following percentiles for potential tier placement. So we think of tier 1 above 25%, tier 2 between 10 and 25%, and tier 3 10% and below.
There are times, however, that these guidelines may not fit your student population. Keep in mind, these cut scores are based on national aggregated norms, and they may not align with the resulting percentages for your district. If that is the case for you, the challenge is in being able to select the right group for intervention. So use your screener data to then group students by school or district based on the percentiles that make sense for your population.
Exactly. This will provide you with a list of students for each grade level and rank all the students by percentile rank. Use this to determine an intervention cut score to outline your group of students who will be receiving intervention and progress monitoring. So now that we've selected our students for intervention and progress monitoring, let's see what that looks like.
So as Judy mentioned, one of the things that screening tells us is who should participate in progress monitoring. And as I'm sure everyone here knows, progress monitoring is key to a successful RTI MTSS process. Unfortunately, it also has a reputation for being quite labor intensive for teachers. It is critical that the progress monitoring you administer this year can be done from home, asynchronously, and makes teachers' lives easier, not harder. So first, let's define progress monitoring. Student progress monitoring is a repeated measurement of performance using equated probes. It's used to determine if students are responding to the interventions provided or if they need referral for additional, possibly special education testing. So you have completed your screening, you've had your staff meeting to determine who will be receiving RTI services, and now you want a consistent process for all identified students, regardless of where they are learning, to participate in progress monitoring. Typically, this is going to be students in tier 2 and 3 because we are measuring the overall effectiveness of their interventions. We want to make sure the student has the ability to catch up so they aren't referred for additional testing before they're given the chance to close their learning gaps.
And especially this fall, students affected by the COVID slide may be part of tier 2, and that's okay. Individualized learning is the perfect way to address what each student needs. Tiered interventions are really a great place to catch up.
That's right, Judy. And an effective progress monitoring tool gives us the data to show these students are catching up. It tracks results for every test instance during the intervention period. It includes targeted rate of improvement goals and a trend line to establish the student's current rate of improvement. And ideally, all of this is done automatically for the teacher and school psychologists. For example, at Classworks, progress monitoring is set up for maximum ease for both teachers and students. The same progress monitoring tool is used for both reading and math and spans grades K to 8. The teacher simply starts the progress monitoring and the probe automatically appears for the student each week to complete, no matter where learning is happening.
And you know, one of the things that we heard last spring was that Classworks Progress Monitoring offered a simply weekly measure that allowed both teachers and students to maintain consistency while the world was being anything but consistent. And just like with screener testing, ensure that parents understand why students are taking these probes each week, what these tests accomplish, and why it's important to allow the student a quiet place to take these independently.
And one specific strategy we've been working with school districts for the fall is how to get students into the habit of taking their progress monitoring each week. Some teachers said a great practice last spring was having all the students join a video call and take the test with the teacher also on the call, just for the first 2 or 3 weeks, until the students were comfortable meeting the expectations and knew to complete it the same day and the same way each week. Then, once the test is completed each week, teachers have a wide range of important data at their fingertips. Again, this should be available to the teacher regardless of whether they are physically with the student or not. So they want to know the student's overall rate of improvement. The teacher can see at a glance if the student is responding to the intervention or not. They also want to see skill-specific data each week. This is especially important if a student is referred to RTI to track progress on one key skill or domain. And finally, the teacher should have the ability to take notes, right? Make notes. One thing we anticipate this fall is teachers noting whether a student participated in progress monitoring remotely or at school each week.
And again, the beauty of this is twofold, right? Number one, the test automatically appears each week for the student. And number two, the rate of improvement is automatically plotted on the graph for teachers.
So partner with a company that does more than promise you great actionable data. Make sure they can help all your teachers understand the right action to take on that data every time. You also really want an easy way to monitor whether or not the students are completing their progress monitoring each week. Classworks includes both school and district level reports that allows RTI coordinators to monitor the fidelity of the student progress monitoring. There's nothing worse than heading into a referral meeting and discovering that progress monitoring data wasn't being gathered as expected. So make sure you have those global views as well as that detailed student by student reporting.
And one final feature of progress monitoring that is ideal is when the progress monitoring also specifically informs the intervention instruction each student is receiving. With Classworks, this automatically occurs each week, so you are always confident the student is working on the exact skills that are right for them. In summary, look for a program that is easy to implement for both teachers and for students, that will plot all the graphs automatically and that can be completed anywhere.
Now, arguably, the most important part of an RTI process is an effective intervention. Screening and progress monitoring are super important for documentation, but we can't forget the true goal of RTI is to close gaps for students and ultimately support their success as they learn the grade level standards. So to this end, what should interventions look like in the coming school year? Well, ideally, the intervention itself is automatically assigned to each student based on that screener and progress monitoring data. When that happens, the teacher's role here doesn't need to be finding and grading work that doesn't connect to her curriculum. The teacher's role with the intervention focuses on monitoring, modeling behaviors, and motivating the students. Now let's continue with that theme of everything making the teachers' lives easier. For a program you are deploying remotely, or even in a hybrid environment, there are some keys to success. One, the screening results should inform and individualize learning for every student. The program should automatically assign individualized instruction to every student and automatically grade the results for each student. And a reminder for an RTI best practice that I know you all already know. It is important your intervention content is not simply a repeat of your core curriculum at a lower level. Third, the teacher should be able to easily monitor every aspect of student work, no matter when or where the learning is happening. With Classworks, teachers have quick insight and can easily reassign skills as needed. Make sure your school provides a schedule that gives students time to work on the individual skills they need to close learning gaps. And make sure that this is separate from the teacher's grade level instructional time. This schedule should spell out individualized learning time in both the remote and in-person schedules.
Yes, we have seen too many proposed schedules that just say Group B works asynchronously 3 hours at home. And realistically, that just doesn't offer enough structure for students or guardians to know where to focus. Intervention times for those students who need gaps closed should be clearly outlined regardless of where the student is learning.
That's right, that's right. And finally, as we all know, students work harder when they know the caring adults at school care about their outcomes. We recommend scheduling 5-minute conferences or calls with students to ensure fidelity of the intervention. This can happen either in person, if that's where students are, or via video or telephone. So King Middle School here in Atlanta implemented an idea that was very successful for promoting excellent communication. All non-credentialed personnel made specific reach outs to students throughout the spring. They texted, called, emailed, whatever they could do to say, "How are you?" Then they shared Classworks data to review what students could work on, and they celebrated the successes. So looking to the fall, these same individuals will be responsible for tracking student progress and interventions and working on student goal setting in regular intervals. This will be especially important because APS is expecting the first 9 weeks to be entirely digital.
Now, once progress monitoring is in place and students are working on their interventions, it's important for all stakeholders to meet regularly, to review student data, to make changes to the intervention, move tiers, or even decide on next steps, such as possible referral for special education. Now, these meetings typically occur every 4 to 6 weeks. This ensures that data is current and relevant. Meetings may look different this year. Really, whether you are on-site or working virtually, these meetings may be better executed via a video conferencing tool. There are actually some benefits to moving to virtual meetings. Parents are more likely to participate if they don't have to take a day off. They can just jump on a call from work. Members of the team who may work with multiple schools will not have to travel to be at the meeting. This format really helps level the playing field and allows all members to be equal participants in the meeting. So, who is attending? Your district's RTI plan usually dictates who should attend these meetings. It might differ depending on whether you are discussing Tier 2 or Tier 3 students. So let's talk about who may be participating in our meeting. Of course, classroom teachers, counselors, school psychologists, instructional coaches, and interventionists. Of course, administrators are highly valuable at data meetings. And then parents, right? Parent communication is so key. Having parents on board is integral to student success. Each person has a role and offers a different perspective. And again, meeting virtually ensures everyone can participate equally. This eclectic group is designed to be able to look at each student from a variety of vantage points to ensure a complete picture and then formulate the most appropriate next steps. So if we are executing a remote RTI meeting, all members of the team need to be able to view data, right? So let's talk about what that looks like. On a video call, use screen sharing to discuss data and student performance. Have one team member be responsible for making sure the data is available for each student that's to be discussed. In these RTI student problem-solving meetings, it's important to look at data that will inform the next steps for the student. The 2 pieces of data to look for as far as results go are skills mastery and growth. In Classworks, for example, Classworks Standards Mastery Report shows skills and standards a student is working on and identifies mastery for that skill.
And then progress monitoring results are your key to understanding if the student is responding to the intervention as a whole. And in Classworks, since progress monitoring and the universal screener are on the same vertical scale, percentile ranks can be used as an additional measure of student growth. You use all of these results together to make the right decisions for each student.
So what are some of the right decisions? What if the intervention, for example, is off track? what instructional changes should be made. So you may be seeing that the student is not growing. That would be evident in your progress monitoring results. Skill mastery is not being achieved, as you would see in your standards mastery report. So what now? You want to analyze that mastery, right? Reassign any instruction below mastery, now which in Classworks is below 80%. And I'm going to repeat what Melissa said earlier, conference with students. Have a Zoom conference with the students. Make a phone call. Make sure to communicate with the student what they're doing well and what their next steps are. And this should only be a few minutes. Don't be afraid to discuss scores, but also celebrate success and strategize how to improve weak areas. Ensure that students are tracking their scores in a data notebook. This is integral into your one-on-one conference. Student ownership is so powerful. The bottom line is that meaningful data meetings result in action. It's crucial to understand what data you need and have it available during those meetings. Now, in Classworks, you have two options for data. You have live data and you have data from printed reports. Reports are printed when documentation is needed for student folders or to share with parents, right? Live data is reviewed by teachers daily. This is the basis for that 5-minute student conference. It's here teachers make those important instructional decisions, especially when executing a virtual RTI process. Now, actions may include analyzing the mastery of student intervention, reassigning, or even stopping the progress monitoring to adjust the level for a student. Literally taking data to action with just a click.
And any actions teachers take are seamless for the student working virtually. Let's say you change their probe level or modify the intervention. This doesn't change any student actions as far as them logging in each week to complete their progress monitoring or logging in to work on their individualized learning. We can't underestimate the importance of keeping processes, schedules, and habits consistent for students, especially this year.
Yeah, virtual academic intervention is effective with these specific guidelines for meetings, instruction, and monitoring. But let's step back and think about the big picture for the student. What about behavioral interventions?
One thing everyone is grappling with is effectively helping students needing behavioral interventions if we're even partially virtual this coming year. How do we effectively document with daily behavioral worksheets if students are only physically in the building twice a week, or, as we're hearing more and more, possibly not at all for the first 9 weeks to month? So 2 core components of social and emotional learning, self-awareness and self-management, are often developed using PBIS worksheets with students, and they will definitely apply in the fall. For example, if your learning is remote, you likely want to make sure all students are responsive, attentive, and respectful during video sessions. The Center on PBIS wrote some great guidelines for student expectations during virtual learning, and then this particular set of expectations comes to us courtesy of Grandview Middle School in Minnesota. I think it was Stonka Public Schools ISD 277. However, even with great guidelines like this, documenting these goals and behaviors on remote days can really be a challenge. So to help address this, we recommend using digital student observation worksheets. Now, all teachers throughout the day can document student engagement and behavior depending on the goals established for each student. Students and teachers can both see their progress on the digital daily worksheet, and this is very motivating for students. And this is being documented everywhere students are learning.
This is another benefit to making this digital. It really keeps all teachers in the loop. If Johnny's having a bad day, I'm aware of this before Johnny walks through the door or joins my Google Meet, right? So not just after he hands me a sheet to sign and document.
Yep. And then similar, but slightly different from PBIS, is student goal setting and reflection on their progress towards specific goals. These can be weekly or even daily goals that the student sets. They may be academic or they may be personal. Moving to a hybrid or 100% virtual model does not mean we need to abandon these initiatives. In fact, they are likely even more important than. So Classworks has prioritized making our physical success notebook into a digital resource. This is a place for students to set personal goals each week, to document how they plan to accomplish their goals, and then reflect on their progress. Teacher then gives feedback as the student works toward their goals. Because this is a digital resource, goal setting and reflection takes place everywhere. This also facilitates asynchronous communication between students and teachers about progress toward goals. And of course, conversations about these goals can also take place during office hours and intervention periods.
Finally, we also know that teachers also need reliable resources and best practices within Tier 1 instruction that are dynamic, address student need, and help make connections. So important to supporting all these efforts is a strong Tier 1 curriculum requiring effective teaching and strong instructional practices. So the final step is to analyze those instructional practices and put powerful instruction in place that is flexible and works well in a virtual environment. Have teachers reflect on what practices are incorporated or need to be incorporated into their day-to-day routines. So what are the characteristics of powerful Tier 1 instruction? Let's start with teach critical skills and strategies. Effective teachers teach skills, strategies, and concepts, right? Strategies empower students to independently tackle new concepts. Differentiate and adapt instruction based on assessment data to meet student needs. Effective teachers recognize that one size doesn't fit all and are ready to adapt instruction, both content and methods. Make sure students have explicit instruction and lots of opportunity to practice skills. This practice will occur with and without teacher support. Students shouldn't have to infer what they're supposed to learn, right? Once critical content is covered, check for understanding, reteach, and monitor progress. Now, at Classworks, we have supplemental Tier 1 instruction for virtual learning used in the Classworks platform or into your LMS, such as Google Classroom or Schoology. These resources support teachers in executing powerful Tier 1 instruction. We could actually have a whole webinar about high-quality Tier 1 instruction and best practices. However, in the interest of time for today's webinar, we focused on the best practices for screening, data meetings, progress monitoring, and the high-quality intervention. But the importance of continually evaluating the quality of Tier 1 instruction is also important.
Okay, we have talked through best practices for RTI and then how to apply those in a virtual landscape. Let's recap with an action plan you can put in place to make sure you are equipped for an awesome RTI process that is not labor intensive for teachers and produces great results for students. We will send a copy of this action plan with the recording of the webinar. So first, screen all students early, whether at home or in person. Then, school leadership, review the data, determine who needs Tier 2 and Tier 3 interventions. And don't hesitate to ask your screener vendor for support if you'd like it. Third, build time in the school schedule, both in person and remotely, for students to take progress monitoring weekly and spend time on interventions. Extra learning time should be given its own specific time and attention. Teachers and other school personnel should build a plan for that first month of progress monitoring. How to make taking that probe and taking it seriously an excellent habit to develop right from the beginning. Communicate expectations with parents for screening, progress monitoring, and work on interventions. This is different than what is happening in their regular classroom and will probably not match their homework, right? So look to your vendors for resources to share with parents. Regular communication between students receiving interventions and teachers or other school personnel should be built into the weekly school schedule. This also includes discussions about PBIS checklists and student goal setting. Number 7, plan for those SST meetings every 4 to 6 weeks. And remembering Judy's recommendation, make these virtual meetings all the time. And finally, embrace the fact that a remote schedule means more asynchronous communication between teachers and students. Things like a digital behavior worksheet, digital success notebook, the automatic grading of interventions and progress monitoring will all help ensure your environment can be successful while students are learning remotely.
Okay. All right, I'm going to go ahead and allow everyone to unmute themselves. Joanne and Garrett, I was not able to man chat. Did we have any questions that we need to go over first?
Let's see, let me take a look. One of the questions was, does the progress monitoring go into the individualized instruction to automatically assess that or fix the assessment?
Joanne, do you want to speak to that? Oop, Joanne, let me unmute you.
All right. The answer is yes. So what happens with the progress monitoring is that it will recommend additional skills that'll be placed in the students' individualized learning based on how they perform on those progress monitoring probes. So it does, it works fluidly, so it does provide up-to-date, it keeps up to date what the student is working on based on the new information that we have on that student.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive, and that's actually a new Classworks enhancement that the progress monitoring is now working with the intervention. So now not only your our screener, but if you have a partner, whether it's NWEA or Scantron or ACT or whoever, those also integrate and progress monitoring. So everything is constantly informing the ILP. So there's less duplicates, and it's been really awesome rolling that out.
And it's great. So,
Yeah. All right. Is there another question? I think someone was asking about the LMSs, and I feel fairly certain if any LMS we integrate seamlessly with.
That is correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nope, that looked like all the questions I have, unless you guys got direct ones.
Okay, perfect. Well, if we don't have any more questions, feel free to unmute yourself, and you can ask questions, or if you prefer, again, put your email in the chat, and when we get the recording out to you, we can open, if you'd rather, a personal dialogue to discuss your school or your district. We'd be happy to assist. We're doing a lot of logistical planning with many schools and districts, and it's been and they've all been really fabulous so far. Any questions so far? Well, if anyone, feel free to jump in. I do want to also let everyone know that we have 2 more sessions tomorrow. One is going to be on diving a deeper dive into the social and emotional learning, integrating that into your intervention. And it's a fascinating presentation that we put together. And then tomorrow afternoon, we have remote learning specifically for special education students, which is obviously at the top of everyone's mind. So two more really great presentations tomorrow. So we definitely would love to see y'all. And those are shorter. I believe those are 30-minute. This was an hour-long increment in exhibitor time, but tomorrow it would be their 30-minute long presentations. So.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
Could formative assessments serve as kind of screeners or kind of progress monitoring tools to see where a kid is compared to where they were like early spring?
So the answer to that roughly is yes, but we've been doing MAP. Many of our districts did periodic assessment last year. It might have been MAP or STAR or Scantron, and the students were able to successfully take that assessment in the fall, and most of them in the winter, But when everything shut everything down in March, most of them did not take that assessment in the spring. So the most recent data many schools have right now on their students is from last December or January. And so the answer would be, if you use our universal screener or you use another formative assessment, you're going to get a picture of where that student is right now. And our screener and other assessments will all come from a norm, and they're from different norm rated studies, but all of those norms go back to a grade level. So if you had the assessment data from a different product or partner from last spring or last winter, and it told you that this score is equal to this grade level this month, you would be able to match that information against a screener from a different producer company and go back and find their grade level and be able to see that.
It's true. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Thank you.
Teddy has a question. Oh, I got one more. So Teddy has a question about how long does the assessment take, or is it an ongoing assessment?
All right. So our universal screener, it is roughly, I'd say, between 25 and 30 minutes for most students. On one of those reports that Melissa and Judy shared in the session showed you the predictive piece, the report that comes out and says, here's where your students are based on the screener. You'll have the amount of time that they spent on the assessment on that report, and you can also access it live in the product. So if a student took the test in 2 minutes, you'll know that, and the student has the ability to take a equitable form of the same assessment, not the same questions, just an equitable form, and to get a more adjusted piece. And so we recommend that they do that 3 times a year, fall, winter, and spring, just like any other. But as the student performs on their path and on their progress monitoring, it all works together to keep giving the student the instruction that they're ready to learn. So if I was ready to learn, say, basic multiplication based on my screener, but when I started to work in progress monitoring, my scores on basic multiplication pieces were not where they needed to be, my plan is going to get adjusted automatically to give me some prerequisite skills. So it might be talking about how to use an array for multiplying, how to see multiplying as repeated addition, just as an example. And so I'll always be moving forward, but we do recommend students do those formative assessments. Also because it does give you an update on where are they, percentile rank, or on what depth of intervention do they need.
Also, Joanne, maybe in addition, how long approximately do the progress monitoring probes take weekly? They're a little bit shorter, of course.
Right. So most of our students that are using progress monitoring are identified as tier 2 or tier 3 students. So we already know they need additional time working on those needed skills. Mm-hmm. So generally, what we hear from teachers for the most part is that students spend about 20 to 25 minutes a week, or 20 to 25 minutes a probe on that progress monitoring.
And there is the math and the ELA probe. And I also want to point out, with the progress monitoring probes, you have the ability to also reassign that, because, especially if these students are taking them virtually and they just fly through it and you can see it, like, they're doing okay, and then all of a sudden 1 week they're down, you can reassign those, which will be very beneficial, especially those first few weeks, just to make sure that they've got to understand the importance of them, and they need to, it's nothing to put added stress on, but this is just to make sure we know, where you're going. So you can, so you can reassign those probes if needed.
And that's a great way to bring in the SEL component, with self-management and self-responsibility,
right?
Because our students are having to work away. And so I know in the webinar tomorrow, they're really going to dig into SEL.
Michelle, did you have a question?
Yes, I know the maps, and I believe the iStation screeners have different subject sessions. Do yours have how many sessions? Like, is it an overall, kind of like Alex has it's a math assessment, so it's just math. But does this one have like a ELA, a math, a science, or is it just one?
We have math and ELA screeners.
Okay.
They are separate, and we have some science content. We do not have a screener for science. What is the grade level for science, Joanne?
Well, we label it elementary science. However, that is based on the text difficulty. I've had many middle school teachers dig into the science and say, I can find ways to connect this for my students.
Sure.
So it's not overly simple.
Sure.
Okay.
One other thing I would love for you to maybe speak to a little bit, and obviously I know this was this specific presentation is more towards intervention, but I just wanted, Joanne, you to speak real quickly maybe about the integrated reading and applied math, how if teachers, it's going to be a great tool for virtual use for, class instruction. If you'll just speak to that quickly.
Helen knows I can speak on that forever and a day, so I'll try and summarize. What we have with our reading and our math are grade level specific instructional pieces. And there are 43 in math at each grade level, and there are 36 in reading at each grade level. And my favorite thing about them, and that I've heard from teachers since we've all gone virtual or remote or whatever term you want to call it, is that they've missed looking over their student's shoulder while they're working. We can see how a student solves a problem. They picked A or they picked B remotely, but they've missed seeing how they processed or how they interacted with the problem in math or with the text in reading. And both of these elements of Classworks allow you real-time and historic access to how a student solved the math problem. You'll have their Canvas, their work area, where they practice digital tools that are, they're similar to what students use on high-stakes state assessments that are done on the computer. So you'll be able to see the processing that they did. So they won't just be saying, oh, the answer is A, and you go, well, that's great, it's wrong, but I don't know how to help you because I don't know what you thought. You'll be able to see that. And teachers have had live classes where they've used, say, Microsoft Meet. And while the students are working, the teacher can see their Canvas through the computer and be able to interact with the student and give feedback. Mm-hmm. And then also students who've completed their work later, the teacher can still look at it and give feedback. And those tools that are present will support students with any accommodations that they might need. So if they have a read aloud type accommodation on an assessment, they would also be able to have that support there. And the reading, again, we know how important it is to highlight and annotate text and to interact with text through close reading. We have that availability as well, where the teacher can see, if she's asked the students to highlight the main ideas and the details, or to show where they found their answer or the evidence for their answer to a certain question, they can do that on the text. And again, the teacher has access to that real time and later. So very supportive.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Joanne. I wanted to make sure that we could just speak to that for a moment. So I have put in the chat, I don't want to keep you guys too much longer. So I've put in the chat our 2 events for tomorrow. Uh-oh, did I miss the Zoom? Okay, there we go. So please feel free to hop on tomorrow to more great presentations, webinars. Don't forget to give us your email, and feel free to, once we send this out, to contact Garrett Smith or myself or Joanne. We'd love to get a discussion with you, your school, your district, to help everyone get ready for this new year.
Thank you so much, everybody, for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Stay safe.
Yes.